So welcome. It's actually wonderful. Just looking at the list of individuals who registered, I know some of you, or some individuals might still be coming online, but we have about 8 different countries being represented on this call, which is absolutely fabulous. And I think it speaks so highly to Pete and how many parts of the world that you've touched. So we have people from South Africa, from Gibraltar, from the United Kingdom, from Finland, Luxembourg, Germany, Singapore, Denmark. So we want to welcome all of you here. You're all very special to our network. And I have the lucky for me, but I got the lucky straw, I think, and that is introducing Pete today. I don't think he needs much of an introduction. So what I've actually done is I've really drawn on a bit of a collaborative input, Pete, if you don't mind, from our network that I would like to briefly do. I know I've had to be quite purposeful about keeping this short, as Steve told me to, and I will. But so looking around at everybody on the screen, I would only imagine that Pete has positively impacted all of your life in some way. And I know that he's done that for so many people's lives across many continents and across many decades. And for me, I think today's title really speaks so profoundly, Pete, to what you are so brilliant at traversing. And that is seeing a terrain of uncertainty, of chaos, of the unexpected, from a stance of how fascinating. And with a great sense of purpose and your incredible ability to visualize possibilities, you really guide others quite seamlessly with an intense interest to what they have to contribute in any scenario. And only really sharing your abundance of wisdom and knowledge when appropriate, but really allowing individuals to make their own decisions whilst ensuring they're always thinking out of the box and stretching themselves out of their comfort zone. And I really want to acknowledge you for that. And sorry, could you just turn yourself on mute? I'm not too sure whose noise is coming through. Pete, your leadership adapts to whatever is required in a moment, whether that be from the front, from alongside individuals, or from behind. But most importantly, your leadership always ensures that a group never gets lost, no matter what the terrain is. And this brings an immense courage to knowing what to do when you don't know what to do, and especially when Mick hasn't told you. So Pete, thank you. Your ability to also hold a meeting with no agenda, yet leaving one feeling inspired and motivating is so admirable. And the importance you place on your values, on your family, on your relationships is truly contagious. You always find time to share a good story and to share your wicked sense of humor. I can't attest to this, but I know the others in the network can really confirm that you're not only a great golfing partner, but opponent too. And I do know that you're a fabulous companion over a tasty cappuccino and a good glass of red wine. And you are also a damn fine bush tracker. So I'm not going to take up too much, but just huge acknowledgement and appreciation to you from us all for the friend and the mentor that you are in our lives. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Susie. It is truly wonderful to see you all. And I do think I know pretty much everybody here. I am going to just acknowledge one or two. Egbert, wonderful to see you up and about from Luxembourg. And looking a lot better than the last time I saw you, I must confess. And I know that many of you have joined us on Leading with Humanity in South Africa. 2 of you, Tina and Yoni, just last week. So you are still, headspace is still in Pinda, I'm sure. But for the rest of you, just wonderful to see you all. And Mick Finn, please put your video on, because I want to show everybody that Mick truly is a person. You've all heard us talk about Mick hasn't told us. And Mick, we need to see you. So that, for anyone who wants to know what Mick looks like, is Mick. He is real and alive, and not somebody who is a figment of our imagination, even though his instructions usually are. Okay, so interesting topic. And let me just, if I may, share my screen here. And I guess the question is, for many of us, wherever in the world we live, it does seem that the world is a little bit dear mekaar, as we say in South Africa, which is through itself or discombobulated or confused. I don't know what the literal translation of dear mekaar is. But the question is, do we have to lead differently in these crazy times? Or actually, have we always had crazy times and we just got to find another way to think about leadership in these times? But let me first just define what I mean by crazy. And as an adjective, it can mean mentally deranged, demented, or insane. And many of you might allude to Vladimir Putin and say, well, that fits. Or our dear friend or not dear friend, the gentleman who runs North Korea. Maybe they are a little bit crazy. It could also mean just informally, if it's crazy, it's unpredictable, it's not conforming, or just odd or strange. Or in another way, it could also mean unusual, bizarre, or singular in a way. But I think for the purposes of this discussion, I want to really focus here to say that it's an unpredictable, non-conforming or odd world, strange world that we're living in. And it's different. And I think that's the key thought here. It's not necessarily the same as the past. And I said to Graham Linney, who's on the call here, that I was going to quote him today. And he gave us the most wonderful quote earlier this year when he spent a week with us. And that is, the past is another country and I don't live there. And really, we have to understand that the past is another world. And Graham, thank you for that wonderful quote, which we have used liberally, I must confess, but always quoted you. So let's first just understand what we mean by crazy times. And I am going to use the letters C.R.A.Z. or Z and Y to help explain this. And the crazy context we live in is that we live in a time of great conflict all over the world. Nuclear arsenals are swelling. Conflict seems to be on the rise. Millions and millions of people are displaced. It seems that international law is disregarded with impunity as criminal and terrorist networks profit from the divisions and violence. This is a situation the world finds itself in today. You know, the United Nations suggests that there are currently somewhere between 25 and 30 conflicts happening in the world currently. And these could be described as either worsening, unchanging, or improving. But of those 25 to 30, none is seen to be improving, save for one that yesterday we heard, and I'm going to refer to it later on, which is Ethiopia, where it seems that they may have reached an agreement, which is wonderful news. But the reasons for the outbreak of conflict range from territorial disputes, regional tension, corruption, and dwindling resources, which are attributed to climate change. And I think a lot of the people in North Africa have been displaced because of what's happened to the climate there, and the crops and the rains have lost. So, you know, you find people are heading into Europe for reasons of livelihood, not for reasons of any other fundamental things, and maybe also some violence and terror. So conflicts disrupt access to basic services. Conflicts disrupt, you know, things like food and water, and force people in many places into extreme poverty. And the poorest and most vulnerable often paying them the highest price. And it's very difficult to try and reverse these trends, because they just seem to be escalating all over the world. The humanitarian crisis in Ukraine is in the spotlight now, but there's so many other places where this is happening. And the United Nations also suggests that at no time since World War II has the world been in more state of conflict. But I want to just back off actually political conflict or wars that are taking place to look at a different kind of war that's taking place within political parties. Just look at our own in South Africa, there's a war within the ruling party. In the US, there seems to be a war between the two prevailing parties of the day. And I dare say that there has been some kind of a war going on inside the Tories in the UK of late. So again, the UN says that estimate that a quarter of the global population, sort of 2 billion, are living in conflict-afflicted areas in the world at the moment. So it is seriously crazy times. And sadly, women and children are often bear the brunt of this conflict, being not seen as human beings, the human beings they are, but as weapons of war. And I just used, I mean, think of what's happening in Iran as we speak. So all of this rampant conflict crisis breeds more and more complexity. I know the acronym that many of you know is VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And boy, it is complex. And everyone is desperately looking for something. But before we find a solution, the R here means that simply we find when this conflict happens, people react. And the react typically tends to be fight or flight, basic human instinct. And as we fight or flight, the flight could be that we think, well, the place we live is no longer appropriate. We've got to up and move somewhere else in the world. Sadly, in South Africa, many people think that's the thing to do, to go somewhere else where it's perceived safer or perceived more opportunity. Even inside the country, people are semigrating, as we call it, moving out of bigger cities into more rural areas. So this constant say, well, how do we move away the flight from what we see as a conflict driven? But many of these great migrations, and particularly into Europe, is livelihood driven. It's just that there's no life available where we are, not just for convenience. And what happens in times of conflict as well is that the reaction is that people look for tribes to associate with. And that's often where crime syndicates really evolve and grow. And we see that happening in Haiti at the moment, and to some extent in Brazil, with the election that took place there a week or so back. But apart from war, when disagreements happen, what is our natural inclination? Do we want to stand our ground and say, no way is they wrong? And I'm talking here about in between departments, in our own companies, between us and suppliers or intermediaries that we work in. And our natural tendency is to want to defend our narrative, our point of view, and our way of seeing the world. And the more we argue it, the more we find supporting data to justify our viewpoint. And very often that is driven by fake news, or we go and seek to find some narrative that supports our view, or we learn to lie with statistics. We play with statistics to prove our point of view. But we cement our view and into an unchangeable, immalleable, if that's such a word, opinion that we defend at all costs. And we see that happening, sadly, in the US at the moment, which has really become very polarized. So conflict means that there's a reaction, which tends to be fight or flight, but much of it is also driven by a thing called anxiety. And we know, again, from the World Health Organization, that they reckon there is just under 1 billion people in the world who are fundamentally facing either depression or anxiety. And it's driven by what they perceive in their environments and where they are. It's an extraordinary tough times. And uncertainty, of course, breeds anxiety. It breeds the hopeless, helpless narrative. Well, what can I do? Oh, woe is me. What I do, there's nothing I can do. I must just leave or go somewhere else. And where things are going, we must leave here. It's not safe. There is no future. Again, that just under 1 billion people suggests that 1 in 8 people in the world has got some form of mental disorder, predominantly anxiety or depression, which is a tragic statistic. And the World Health Organization suggests that the cost of this is about $1 trillion US a year. Not sure how they measure it, but probably in absenteeism, medical costs, etc. really a particularly challenging situation for us all. And sadly, what this fight or flight or batting for our own thing leads us to is what we might call a zero-sum game, where it's winner takes all. It's my way or it's the highway. It's us versus them. It's me versus you. And it's all about power. And what happens between nations, between communities, between gangs, between political parties, between factions, departments and organizations and trade unions, this happens everywhere. And we find that it's my way or it's no way. Even in families sometimes, if we as parents get too dogmatic about our views of the world. So that's really where it's been. We want to make sure our view is the prevailing view to get our way, and power is what gets things done. But I think that with all of this going on, which sounds very, very challenging, there is another element, which is a yearning. I really do think there is a yearning globally for a better way. There must be something different here. There must be hope. There must be a way of resolving this conflict or reduction in conflict. There's a yearning for peace. There's a yearning for clarity and certainty. There's a yearning for more stability in markets, for better market conditions, for better standard of living, for more safety, and just for a better future for all. And that's where we need to understand that the past is done, and we need to understand we're living in this world, and this yearning is real. And what are we going to do about it is the question, because I do think that these crazy times are calling for something different. Many of you will know that I've always loved the work of Peter Drucker. And one of my favorite quotes that I've used ad nauseum over the years is that in times of turbulence, it's not the turbulence that we should be worried about, it's to respond with yesterday's thinking. And with due respect to Peter Drucker, I'm going to tweak it a bit and say, in crazy times, it's not the craziness that's going to it's a problem. It's trying to respond to crazy times with yesterday's thinking. So let me just talk about what was yesterday's thinking. What was yesterday's logic? The past narrative to a world that was crazy. Well, we've loved this notion of control. We've always, from as long as we can remember, people have tried to control things. Let's button down the hatch, let's get in control, and then we can tell people what to do. As long as we are in power, we can call the shots, and everybody has got to fit in. And typically what came with that control was a thing called rules and regulations. We've come out of a world where rules and regulations abound. You will do this, you're not allowed to do this. We see it in Iran today, trying to control the young ladies with rules and regulations on what they call the morality police enforcing. You have to wear certain dress or else it's not acceptable. This is yesterday's crazy logic, but we see it all over in markets. Many of you are in the insurance world would know that it seems that every time something crazy happens in financial markets, what do they want? They bring more rules and regulations. And it was our yesterday's logic. That's how you got things done. You made rules and regulations and everybody had to adhere. But what we're finding these days is that, as we know in South Africa, a rule and regulation about a stop street or a traffic light is purely a suggestion for many of our drivers. Why let something like that get in the way of me? I'm in a hurry. And so we tend to bend and people take chances, and that's what happens the world over. That's why we have so much bribery and corruption, is to get around rules and regulations. And it's naive to think that to fix things, we must bring in more rules and regulations. We think with control if we write these down, and I dare say that's the same in schools, in businesses, in political parties, in countries. It's the same principle, rules and regulations, whilst you do need to have guidelines. And those of you who know me know that I far prefer guidelines that suggest you can do anything you like, but you can't do these. This is outside the field of play. But sadly, too many rules and regulations are, this is what you've got to do. And people kick against it. It's our natural inclination to say, I'm different. I don't want to adhere to those kind of things. And in order to enforce rules and regulations, we've had to have a lot of austerity in many countries, really stringent, but tightening down the hatches. Again, I come back to Iran with, when you've got morality police, who are policing the behavior of students. Gosh, it's just mind boggles at the austerity and how people are really limited in their freedom. And austerity does limit the freedom and people, but that was the world we live in. We grew up in a world that actually, it limited our freedom. Certainly in South Africa, in the old South Africa, that was how it was for many South Africans, sadly. And we had a thing called xenophobia. Now, before all the English students jump on me and say, Pete, you've spelt that wrong. I know I've spelt it wrong, but I've spelt it phonetically. Okay, I know it is with an X, but it sounds Z, xenophobia. So cut me some slack, please. But xenophobia says we dislike anyone who's not like us. We want to get rid of people who are not like us. And you see it in countries. You see it here where we're trying to get rid of foreign nationals. I guess you see it happening in the UK right now with the questions about all those immigrants trying to come in the immigration centers. But we see it in companies. If we say, well, this person doesn't fit in. It's not ons mensa, as we say in South Africa, not our kind of people. Don't fit our culture, don't fit who we are. And we need to be careful of all our own prejudices because we're very quick. Again, it goes back to what we see and we build these prejudices up. And let's face it, we all have some form of prejudice. And we have to be careful that we don't let this is the way the world worked. It's you either fit in with us or you go somewhere else. I think it was called impolitely FIFO, but that's just the way it was. And then, of course, there was a yell for help because everyone says, this is suppressing me. I really don't like this kind of unbelievable austerity. And that people are saying, please help me fix it. And I think a lot of it is that many people still yearn for these old days because one thing control rules and regulations and this gave us was a degree of certainty. Was a degree of this is how things operate. And if I just, mind my own business and keep my nose out of trouble, things will be okay. It was never my fault. It was always somebody else. We could criticize and bleat about the way things, the regulations that were there. But deep down, many of us actually quite craved the certainty of what those sort of environments gave us. And so there was this kind of mixture of, yes, we like that certainty, but we hate having people tell us what to do. And so we kind of flexed our muscles. But that again, the moment you flex your muscles and you jump out of your circle of certainty, you all know that comes with a consequence. So if this was yesterday's logic, to build on Drucker's analogy, what would be today's logic? What are we suggesting could be crazy leadership in today's world? And many of these thoughts will not be new to you who have spent some time with us on Leading with Humanity this year. So hopefully you're all with me still. The first, I believe, is we've got to learn how to collaborate in a far greater way than we have done in the past. Collaboration is not necessarily just negotiation where it's an arm wrestle. Collaboration means that we really do need to begin to understand other perspectives and see the perspective from another person's position and begin to understand why they hold the view they hold, because then it gives us a chance to find some common ground. And I was delighted to see just yesterday the announcement that through some good negotiation clearly and the willingness to collaborate between the warring factions in Ethiopia, that 2-year war could look like being sorted out because people actually were willing to come together and to talk not at each other, but with each other, and to find a way to communicate and to find a common ground. Clearly, this collaboration comes using all three of our brains, as we know from neuroscience. Our head brain giving us the curiosity factor, our heart brain giving us the compassion for another perspective and the plight of other people, and the courage to make some bold choices, the courage to stand up and say, this is not okay, and the courage to say, I can do something different, or I'm going to offer a different perspective. Of course, that comes with the vulnerability of being rejected, or being stomped on, or having your plan rejected, or of trying something and it not working. But boy, we need people who are prepared to have the courage to stand up and try and make a difference. As the old quote from the statesman Edwin Burke went, for evil to prevail, it just means for good people to do nothing, or thereabouts. And I think that's really a key thought that we need to build on here. Linked to that, we need to really restore our relationships with all. And I say restore because I think in many cases, relationships might be battered. But I think in many cases, the relationships have purely been functional, transactional relationship. They haven't been a transformational relationship. And I do think that we need to move from being purely transactional in our relationships with other people, in finding a common solution, to being far more transformational. And in many cases, we've got to learn from Einstein's wonderful view that the challenges of today will not be resolved by using the same level of thinking that created the challenges. We need to move to a higher level. And that only comes when the different sides understand how to collaborate and restore and the relationships at a level that breeds something that historically wasn't possible. Linked to that then is that it's our own personal authenticity. It's very difficult to build a relationship if people don't know who you are, if you're a Jekyll and Hyde, if you're a chameleon. And so the need for us to be authentically ourselves in all things and to risk letting ourselves be seen for who we are becomes incredibly important in everything we do. And that authenticity also breeds that lovely thought of the anti-fragility, in that, for those who are not familiar with it, it's different to resilience. We often talk about we need to build resilience, but resilience says that I need to build the capacity or capability to bounce back to my former form. I'll be resilient and not letting my former self be impaired. Anti-fragility says I will take all that's coming along, I will learn from it, I will adapt from it, I will adjust, I'll admit mistakes, and I'll move to a higher level of being myself. And that's being anti-fragile. So we need that in ourselves, be authentic and build that anti-fragility. Understand that in this crazy world, you do not have all the answers. And the simple statement, I don't know, is a very suitable and valuable answer in today's world, because it's arrogant to think that you do have all the answers, because the future is just throwing us so many new curveballs and variables. I think then we need to get real zeal. And I love the definition of zeal is great energy or enthusiasm in pursuit of a cause or an objective. And I think you see it in action in terms of the way Zelensky has led Ukraine. I think it's very simple, is you've got a nation fighting with zeal and a nation against a nation who doesn't know why they're there in terms of those who are fighting it. But this zeal, which leads for a zest for what we're doing and a zest for life, I think we have to be enthusiastic about our world. Yes, it is crazy times and we mustn't feel helpless, hopeless. We have to develop an enthusiasm, energy to say, you know, I can make a difference here. I can do something to improve even my small patch, that part, that our sphere of influence, if you like. And that could be our company, it could be our team, it could be the group of people we interact with, it could be our staff common room, it could be the communities we live in. It's what Meg Wheatley calls our islands of sanity. What is that circle of influence that we can bring about? And in that, we need to get into that with great zest and enthusiasm to try and galvanize others to say, what do we choose for ourselves in terms of a better way? You cannot wait for governments today to fix this for us, because they can't do it. The political systems of the world are broken, or at best not fit for purpose. And this brings me to the why, is that C.R.A.Z.Y leadership requires you and me. We've got to get up and make it happen. If we're waiting for political leaders to fix our lot in life, they at best can only give us a framework or a playing field to operate in. And they should try and focus on giving us a solid playing field on which to play. Thereafter, it's up to us in our markets, in our environments, to get on and say, what do we do differently? How do we collaborate? How do we restore relationships? How do we authentically behave as an organization, as individuals, and get real zeal in terms of saying, we can change it. As many of you have often heard me say, it's not hopeless, helpless in South Africa. Yes, we have many unemployed, but never before has there been more work to be done. There is so much, and we've got to try and galvanize and help people to find opportunities to generate revenue for themselves, which is not necessarily giving them a job with all the legal ramifications that come with fixed employment. Revenue generating opportunities is something that I think is hugely needed, and it's a practical way. We've got to try and change the status quo in any area that we feel we're unhappy about. We can't wait for somebody else to come along and fix it for us. And that's the challenge, is crazy times is putting the onus back on us to try and do something different, to try and make a difference. Because we all know, don't wait for the government to fix it, because I don't care which country in the world you're in, the government's chances are not going to fix it for us, because they've got unbelievable conflicting and complexity in their own agendas with all what's happening. So take charge of what we can influence, and let's find a way to move forward in a very different way to what we've been used to. It's not about command and control, it's about influence. It's about connecting. I should have put that under the C's. Time for connecting and for really understanding how to really galvanize people to make a difference in whichever sphere of life you're in.